The Third Age lasted for 3021 years, but out of those 3021 years, Sauron was only openly active for 68 of them. The rest of the Third Age he operated behind the scenes, dispatching his servants, men, orcs, and other creatures to do his bidding for him and weaken his enemies. Of these servants, none was more effective than the Witch-king of Angmar, the leader of the Nazgul. In this video, we look at how the Witch-king reshaped the Third Age in less than 100 years. When Sauron openly declared his return in the year 2951, the Westlands of Middle-earth had been in a stable, albeit slowly declining state for the last 1,000 years. The northern kingdom of Arnor had been ruined for almost 1,000 years, and the lands of Eriador were mostly depopulated. Gondor was being ruled by its 24th ruling steward, Turgon, who was in the last years of his life, and the time of the kings was a distant memory. From Turgon's seat in Minas Tirith, he could look across the Anduin and see the dead city of Minas Morgul, a place of unimaginable evil, and beyond that he could see the shadow of Mordor, which had been attacking Gondor for centuries. But if you go back 1,000 years from that, Middle-earth was completely different. Arnor, while weakened, still stood in the north, ruled by King Arathant, and while far from prosperous, many men still lived in Eriador. In Gondor, the victorious general Eärnil was still early in his reign as King Eärnil II, and if he looked across from his seat in Minas Tirith, he would see Minas Ithil, the Tower of the Moon, depopulated but still a Gondorian city. Behind Minas Ithil was Mordor. Gondor's watch on Mordor had mostly subsided at that point, but the land was seemingly still inactive. Except, all of this was about to change, and it was about to change incredibly quickly, and that was thanks to the Witch-king of Angmar. Now, the Witch-king had been working hard for the last 6 centuries. He'd been locked in a war with Arnor, he'd had victories, he'd had defeats, but now he clearly had the upper hand. In Arnor, men knew that their kingdom was doomed unless they received outside help. But that was now a possibility, given that the alliance with Gondor had been restored only a few years earlier. Gondor just needed a little bit more time to recover, and then they could help their ailing northern sister. The Witch-king, however, was not about to sit back and let his work be undone. In the winter of 1974, during the reign of King Arvedui, the Witch-king launched his final invasion, and although the Dunedain of Arnor fought valiantly, they were hopelessly outmatched. The Witch-king seized their capital Fornost, and his forces overran the remnants of Arnor, including places like the Shire. The remaining Dunedain fled over the River Lune, taking refuge in Lindon, and the Witch-king made Fornost his new capital. After a little over 600 years of war, the Witch-king had finally conquered Arnor. Except the Witch-king's triumph was short-lived. The following year, Prince Eärnur of Gondor arrived with a massive army, and together with Lindon and the remnants of Arnor, they marched on the Witch-king. Even despite his tactical errors during the Battle of Fornost, the Witch-king was now the one who was hopelessly outmatched. His army was smashed, and he fled towards Angmar. But before he could arrive to make a defense, he was overtaken by cavalry led by Prince Eärnur and Glorfindel. With no hope of saving his kingdom, the Witch-king fled the north, not to return for 1,000 years. Although the Witch-king was defeated and Angmar was destroyed, in the final moments of that war, the Witch-king did something seemingly minor that would then go on to have a major effect on the history of Middle-earth. While being pursued by Eärnur and his men, the Witch-king decided to turn around and charge the prince. Eärnur would have withstood the charge, but the terror of the Witch-king was too much for his horse, so it bolted. This made the Witch-king laugh, which shamed Eärnur, and neither would forget the encounter. Prince Aranarth, the son of King Arvedui, elected not to continue Arnor, so after 2,095 years, the Northern Kingdom came to an end. The Witch-king's job was finished, but he was not yet done, and now he went south to capitalise on the weakness of the Southern Kingdom. I mentioned earlier that Gondor's watch on Mordor had either completely or mostly subsided by this point, so the Witch-king took advantage of that, and recovered the Land of Shadow in the name of Sauron in 1980, merely 5 years after he was driven from the north. After almost 2,000 years, Mordor was once again a threat on Gondor's doorstep. And once again, the Witch-king was not about to waste any time. 20 years later, he and his fellow Nazgul issued forth from Mordor and besieged the city of Minas Ithil. As I also said earlier, Minas Ithil had been depopulated following the Great Plague, and had declined in importance. Despite that, it was still one of Gondor's primary cities, and it guarded the major pass into Mordor. We don't know how exactly the siege played out, and whether Gondor tried to rescue the city or not, but 2 years later, in 2002, Minas Ithil fell and became Minas Morgul, the Tower of Dark Sorcery. Not only did Sauron regain Mordor, but now he controlled the Morgul Pass, and better yet, he received a palantir with the city. From his new seats in Minas Morgul, the Witch King could easily strike at Gondor. That being said, Gondor was still quite strong at this time, and the Witch King probably didn't have the forces available to make such a daring invasion, so Minas Morgul was silent, until 2043, when King Eärnil II died and Eärnur ascended to the throne. The Witch King and Eärnur had history between them, and the Witch King wasn't about to let Eärnur forget it. So the same year, he sent an emissary to Minas Tirith, offering single combat so that Eärnur could redeem himself of his cowardice. Eärnur was a prideful, hot-tempered man, and certainly not a coward. He would have accepted the challenge had he not been restrained by his wise steward, Mardil Voronway. Unfortunately, Mardil's wisdom can only do so much, and in 2050, the Witch King issued a second challenge to Eärnur. This time, Eärnur could not be restrained. He rode to Minas Morgul with a small company of knights, and was never seen again. Rather importantly, Eärnur did not have an heir, and no new king could be elected, so the line of kings ended, and Gondor passed into the hands of the ruling stewards. So from 1974 to 2050, merely 76 years, the lifetime of an average man, the Witch King had succeeded in ending Arnor. Far from Sauron's dominions in the east and south, Arnor should have been a protected bastion of strength for the Dunedain, and although they had succeeded in weakening themselves, the Witch King had finally ensured that there would be no resurgence. His destruction of Arnor also depopulated Eriador, the land became wild and treacherous, the roads unkempt, hastening the decay of the northwest of Middle-earth. Then the Witch King had delivered Mordor back to Sauron. Given its geographical proximity and how geologically well protected the land is, Mordor should have always been one of Gondor's priorities, but due to both negligence and weakness, the watch on Mordor waned and the Witch King seized the opportunity. When Sauron finally returned in 2942, the land had been prepared for war for almost 1,000 years, and was the source of many invasions into Gondor, including the one in 2000 when the Witch King seized Minas Ithil. From Minas Ithil, Gondor could have protected its heartland better from Mordor's invasions, but the loss of the city meant that Ithilien, one of Gondor's most important provinces, was wide open. The terror of the Morgul Vale, so close in proximity, meant that Ithilien was gradually depopulated, and when the watchful peace ended, forces issuing from Mordor could easily reach Osgiliath. The old capital was completely ruined, and its final inhabitants fled. And finally, the presumed killing of King Eärnur ended the 2,000-year-long line of Anarion. Although the ruling stewards that followed Eärnur ended up being capable rulers, there was power and inspiration that came from having a king. Without the majesty of the kings, Gondor and the southern Dunedain declined even faster, and many of the people of Gondor lost belief in their own agency, instead clinging onto a belief that one day a king would return and save them from the darkness. This did end up coming true though, so can't really argue. So like I said, in the space of 76 years, the Witch King completely reshaped the west of Middle-earth. Basically, he undid over 2,000 years of work across multiple places. He destroyed an entire kingdom, he reclaimed Sauron's old base of operations, he took an important Gondorian city, and then he tricked the Gondorian king into getting himself killed, ending that line of kings. If the first millennium of the Third Age had been dominated by the Free Peoples, and the second millennium was a back and forth, then the Witch King's actions in the final years of the second millennium ensured that the third millennium would be clearly in Sauron's favour. And while the Witch King's actions here were all certainly commanded by Sauron, we do have to remember that whether or not these orders succeeded or not was down to the Witch King's own capability, and while at times I have been harsh on the Witch King, pointing out his pride and sometimes his cowardice, he was still clearly a cunning and capable leader, both on the field and off the field. So Sauron should have thanked the Witch King for his efforts. I say should have because he almost certainly didn't, because the Witch King was enslaved to him and had no choice, so why bother thanking him? Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it or at least found it interesting. The Third Age is kind of interesting because it's almost divided into 3 neat 1,000 year blocks that all feel kind of distinct from each other, because sometimes enormous changes, like the ones mentioned in this video, happened in only a few short years. Also, I feel like I've done a lot of hit pieces on the Witch King, feels good to finally pump up his achievements a bit. Cheers, farewell, and remember, don't feel bad if you can't match the Witch King's achievements in your own lifetime. He did have over 3,000 years of experience by this point.